My name is Jessica Harper, and one night my phone lit up with a number that stole my breath, $486. Yesterday, it was over 15,000. Across the room, my father smirked in his creaky chair. "We needed it more than you," he said, sipping coffee like it was pocket change. "You what?" I whispered. Mom's knitting needles clicked. "Sweetheart, no kids, no mortgage, you'll bounce back." Caleb muttered without looking up. "You always help." Their words cut deeper than the theft. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "Then you won't mind what's coming." Before I tell you what happened that night, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, tap that like button so I know I'm not alone. Don't forget to subscribe because this story doesn't stop here. It only gets heavier and more real. It wasn't always like this, or maybe it always was, and I just couldn't see it. That night, when I stared at my drained account, the glow of my phone burning my eyes, all the memories I'd buried came rushing back like floodwater through a cracked dam. I used to believe that loyalty meant love, that if I kept showing up, if I kept carrying the weight, eventually, they'd see me not as the wallet, not as the responsible one, but as their daughter, their sister. But when I trace it back, the pattern was already written. I was 17 the first time I felt it. Dad's truck broke down on the highway and he stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane. $2,000 for repairs, he grumbled, tossing the paper onto the table. I'd just gotten my first part-time job at the diner tips in crumpled singles, pride swelling in my chest. I offered half my savings without thinking. He clapped my shoulder, muttered, "Knew you'd step up." But he never paid me back. I told myself it was temporary. That family looked out for family. When I left for college, I skipped the dorm meal plan to save money. I stocked my shelves with instant noodles and peanut butter, eating quietly while my roommates laughed about late-night pizza runs. I sent half my work-study paycheck back home for Mom's overdue water bill. She cried on the phone, thanking me, her voice sticky with guilt and relief. "You're the only one I can count on," she whispered. Those words were a crown and a chain at the same time. By 21, I had 3 part-time jobs: library assistant, cashier at the grocery store, and weekends at Rosie's Diner. Uncle Tom used to slide me free pie at the counter, his voice low as he stirred his burnt coffee. "Kid, they'll bleed you dry if you let 'em. You gotta set lines." I laughed back then, too young, too naive. "They're my family, Tom. They'd do the same for me." His eyes softened sad in a way I didn't understand until years later. That's what I used to think. I should have listened. When Caleb got his first credit card, he maxed it out in 3 months' concert tickets, fast food, video games stacked on his shelf. He came to me pale-faced, asking for help. "Just this once, Jess." I paid it off, telling myself it would teach him responsibility. A year later, it was another card. Then another. By then, the words "just this once" had become a family tradition. Mom needed a new washing machine. Dad wanted to upgrade his tools. Caleb's phone broke. The calls came like clockwork, each one a hook sinking deeper into me. I learned to hear the pauses before their requests, the fake sweetness in their voices. "How's work, sweetheart? You've always been the strong one. We're so proud of you." Compliments coded in need. I lived small so they could live large. Skipped vacations. Wore thrift store coats through Montana winters. Watched coworkers decorate their first apartments while I counted pennies to cover someone else's bills. I told myself it was love, that this was what daughters did, but even love has weight. Every holiday at Rosie's Diner felt like theater. Dad carving turkey at Thanksgiving, asking casually, "You'll cover property tax, right?" Jess' mom smiling like the decision was already made. Caleb pouring another drink, muttering, "You're a lifesaver." And me smiling, weakly nodding while my own rent notice sat unopened in my bag. There were moments I wanted to scream, to slam my fist on the table and say, "No, figure it out yourselves." But then Dad would laugh, that booming laugh. Mom would look tired and fragile. Caleb would roll his eyes and the guilt would swallow me whole. So I stayed quiet. I still remember the cracked photo frame in our hallway. A family picture from years ago, Mom's hand resting on Dad's chest. Caleb's grin too wide, my own smile faint but hopeful. The glass split across my face, a jagged line that no one ever bothered to replace. That frame was like me, still standing, still holding everyone else up, even if I was already fractured. By 27, I was paying their property taxes in full. My coworkers joked about weekend trips, and I nodded along knowing my paycheck had already vanished before it hit my account. I convinced myself this was duty, that maybe I was built for sacrifice, but that belief had a cost. I stopped buying birthday cakes for myself, stopped answering calls from friends because I couldn't afford nights out. I wore shoes until the soles peeled, convincing myself I didn't need more. Every compromise became another brick in the wall around me. And still, every time the phone rang, I answered. Jess, can you cover the light bill? Jess, Caleb's car got towed. Jess, just until next month. Each request chipped away at me, but I told myself they'd stop one day. That one day they'd see what I had given, but families like mine don't stop. They learn. They grow bolder. They don't thank you, they assume you. That's why the night I saw 15,000 gone wasn't just theft. It was the final proof that they never saw me at all, that to them I wasn't a daughter. I was an account. And I knew finally Uncle Tom had been right. The night it happened, I walked out of my parents' living room with my phone burning in my hand like a live coal. Their laughter still echoed behind me, Caleb's mocking scoff, Dad's dismissive chuckle, Mom's needles clicking as if I was the one being unreasonable. The storm outside was cold and sharp, but at least it was honest. I sat in my car, the lavender air freshener swinging gently from the mirror, releasing a faint sweetness that didn't match the acid twisting in my stomach. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the transactions. One after another lined up like cuts I hadn't noticed until they bled me dry. Gas stations, grocery stores, fast food chains. Then the luxuries, $614 at Belle Luxe Salon, where Mom bragged about her perfect nails. $1,200 at Game Hub Electronics, where Caleb showed off his new console. A $200 steakhouse bill that Dad had called a business dinner weeks ago, laughing at his own stories. My chest felt tight like the seatbelt had locked me in a vice. It wasn't just the money. It was every time they had looked me in the eye and decided I'd be the sacrifice. Every time I had said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I'd believed love meant giving until there was nothing left. That night, something snapped. Not loud, not visible, but deep inside like a taut string finally breaking after years of strain. I realized I had two choices: keep bleeding or stop. The rain pounded on the windshield, each drop like a drumbeat pushing me forward. My laptop sat in the passenger seat, still warm from earlier. I pulled it onto my lap, the glow of the screen spilling over my face. My cursor hovered over the export button in my banking app. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from a fall or a flight. Click. A file dropped into my downloads, transactions, dates, amounts. Evidence. I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years, one I'd labeled in all caps during college evidence. Back then, it was for saved essays proof in case a professor accused me of plagiarism. Tonight, it became something else. I dropped the file inside. Then, I started building. Screenshots of withdrawals, timestamps, ATM cameras I knew the bank could pull if it came to it. Old text messages where Mom promised to pay me back soon. Dad saying it's just until Friday. Caleb's casual thanks sis, I owe you one. Friday never came. One became dozens. Page after page, line after line. By midnight, I had nearly 60 pages of proof. My hands steadied with each screenshot, each entry. The fear was still there, thick, heavy, but beneath it was something new, clarity. I remembered last Thanksgiving at Rosie's Diner, Dad carving turkey like a king, the knife gleaming under the yellow diner lights. He asked, "You'll cover property taxes, right, Jess, as if it were dessert on the menu." Mom smiled like it was already decided. Caleb raised his glass, muttering, "You're a lifesaver." And me, I nodded, pretending the lump in my throat was just stuffing gone wrong. That memory burned into me as I typed descriptions into the spreadsheet. I wasn't just making a file. I was building a voice I'd never had at that table. At some point, my reflection in the laptop screen caught my eye, dark circles underlining tired eyes, lips pressed thin. I didn't recognize myself. But maybe that was the point. The Jessica they knew was gone. This version of me wasn't going to shrug and smooth things over. I backed up the file to the cloud, then copied it onto a USB drive I tucked into my glove compartment, the plastic small but solid in my palm. A secret weight, a lifeline. The rain eased, leaving streaks on the glass like veins. My chest loosened a little enough for me to breathe. I took a sip from the cold coffee in my travel mug. Bitter grounding. That's when I called Diane. She answered groggily, her lawyer's voice slipping into concern as she heard the edge in mine. "Jess." "What's wrong?" I told her. Not everything. Not the years of slow suffocation, but enough. Enough for her to know this wasn't just family drama. This was theft. She listened without interrupting, her silence heavy but supportive. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "I'm giving you the number of Detective Allison Reed. She's in financial crimes. She'll take you seriously." "Family cases are messy," I whispered, my throat raw. "They are," Diane agreed. "But messy doesn't mean you have to stay silent." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket, rough but warming. After I hung up, I stared out the windshield. The storm had passed, leaving the Montana night sharp and clear. The neon sign from Rosie's Diner glowed faintly in the distance, buzzing like it always had. I remembered Uncle Tom's voice again, softer this time, almost kind. "They'll bleed you dry if you let 'em." He'd been right all along. I leaned back against the seat, the lavender scent filling my lungs. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like their safety net. I felt like someone about to cut the rope. I didn't know exactly how the days ahead would unfold. Police reports, accusations, tears, shouting. But I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty: I wasn't walking back into that house to play the role they'd written for me. That night in the car, with 60 pages of proof glowing on my screen and rain drying on the pavement, I chose myself. And once I did, there was no going back. The next morning, the house felt too quiet. Not theirs, mine. My little apartment smelled faintly of stale coffee and lavender detergent. The walls bare except for a calendar I'd stopped marking months ago. I sat at my kitchen table laptop, open coffee bitter in my mug, and stared at the folder labeled Evidence. It didn't feel real yet. I half expected my phone to ring, Mom's voice chirping through the line, pretending nothing had happened, asking me to grab groceries or cover some overdue bill. I almost wanted her to call because the silence was worse. But when my phone finally did buzz, it wasn't her. It was Diane. "Did you sleep?" she asked. A little I lied. She didn't push. Instead, she gave me the direct number for Detective Allison Reed, warning me that family theft cases were tricky. They'll try to spin it as shared resources, emotional blackmail. You have to be ready. I was ready, or at least I had to be. When I called Detective Reed, her voice was steady, professional, but not cold. I explained what happened, stumbling at first, then steadier as I pulled up the spreadsheet on my laptop. "It's not just one withdrawal," I said. "It's years, thousands. I have screenshots, text messages, receipts." "Good," she replied. "Documentation makes a difference. Bring everything you have. We'll review it." After I hung up, my hands shook, not from fear, but from something sharper, adrenaline. For the first time in years, I was moving, not reacting. I spent the next 3 days quietly assembling my arsenal. On lunch breaks, I sat in my car, transferring files to encrypted drives. At night, I combed through old texts, emails, bank statements, printing every scrap that could show a pattern. A web of their dependence spun tighter than I had realized. Mom's, just until payday messages, Caleb's bragging about electronics he couldn't afford, Dad's casual assumptions that my paycheck belonged to him as much as it did to me. I labeled each page, highlighted dates, built a timeline that stretched back nearly a decade. The stack grew until it filled a binder thick enough to snap shut like a judge's gavel. And I didn't tell a soul. When Mom called, I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was sugar-sweet but strained. "Sweetheart, don't be upset. We're family. Come by for dinner, we'll talk it through." Dinner meant manipulation. Talking meant twisting. I didn't reply. Caleb texted once, "Don't be dramatic. It was just some withdrawals." I muted him too. Dad didn't bother pretending. His voicemail was gruff-clipped. "We'll handle this as a family. Don't you dare make it bigger than it is." But bigger was exactly what I was making it. Quietly. Carefully. At work, no one knew. I smiled through meetings, typed emails, nodded when coworkers joked about happy hour. They didn't see the folder in my bag, the weight of 10 years of betrayal pressed against my hip. They didn't hear the mantra in my head, "Not anymore. Not again." On the fourth day, I drove to the station to meet Detective Reed. The building was squat and gray, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She met me in a small office walls lined with file cabinets, a desk stacked with folders. She looked like someone who'd seen it all but still listened, really listened. I slid the binder across the desk. It's all there. Transactions, texts, screenshots. She flipped through her brow, furrowing. You've done more work than half my cases. This isn't the first time, I said quietly. It's just the first time I'm not ignoring it. She nodded, her eyes sharp. We'll open a file. It won't be fast, but it will move. If they contact you, don't engage. Let us know. Walking out of the station, the Montana air felt thinner, sharper, like a weight had lifted. For the first time, I wasn't just their daughter. I was my own witness. That night, I locked the binder in my closet and sat on the couch staring at the cracked photo frame I'd taken from their house years ago. The glass still split across my face, but instead of sadness, I felt something else resolve. They could try to shatter me, but I had the proof. The calls kept coming over the next week. Mom's voice teetered between guilt and blame. We only took because we trusted you. Why are you doing this? Dad's tone was sharper, angrier. You'll regret this. Blood is blood. Caleb was mocking, then panicked, then silent. I didn't answer. I let the silence grow. In that silence, I began to hear myself. I stopped checking my phone every hour. I made real meals instead of living off instant noodles. I walked to the diner one evening, sat at Uncle Tom's old booth, and ordered coffee. The waitress didn't know me, but the seat felt familiar. I imagined him sitting across from me, shaking his head with that sad, knowing smile. You were right, I whispered, staring at the chipped edge of the table. I should have listened. The door jingled as customers came and went. No one knew I was plotting building reclaiming, and that secrecy gave me strength, because the truth was they thought I'd fold. They thought I'd show up, cry, forgive, and pay again. But this time, the quiet was my weapon. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see, and by the time they realized, it would already be too late. The silence didn't last. It never does with people like them. By the end of the week, Mom's calls multiplied, her voicemails laced with a trembling sweetness that didn't fool me anymore. Sweetheart, let's clear the air. Just us. No lawyers, no police. You don't want to ruin your own family's name, do you? Her voice was soft, but every word was a hook. Clear the air meant erase the evidence. Family name meant their reputation, never mine. I listened once, then deleted the message. The next day, Dad tried his version of diplomacy, his voice low, calculated. Jess, you're making this bigger than it is. We borrowed a little. We'll pay you back. I could almost see his smirk through the phone, but when I asked for a timeline for numbers, the silence stretched until he hung up. He never had answers, just entitlement. Caleb was worse. Texts pinged at midnight. You always help, so what's the difference now? Followed by hope your happy mom's crying. Then angrier. You're really going to sick cops on us over a few bills. You're sick, sick. That word stung, but not the way he meant. I'd spent years believing I was sick for resenting them, for feeling used. But maybe the sickness was theirs, the greed, the casual cruelty of calling theft help. 2 days later, Mom invited me over. Her voice wavered like she was planning a funeral. Please, Jessica, come sit with us. We'll talk. No more fighting. I went. Not to reconcile, but to watch them squirm. The house looked the same as always. Dad's chair by the window, Caleb sprawled on the couch, Mom's knitting basket by her side. But the air was heavier, like they all knew the storm was gathering. Well, look who showed up, Caleb said, smirking as if this was a game. His phone glowed in his hand, always his shield. Mom fussed with silverware at the table that had no food on it. Sit, sweetheart. Let's just talk. I stayed standing. Let's get this over with. Dad leaned forward, elbows on the table, sleeves rolled up like he was about to fix something with his bare hands. Jess, we know you're upset, but we were struggling. We had no choice. I let out a breath that tasted like rust. You had choices. You just chose my account instead of your own wallets. Caleb's smirk faltered. Don't act like we're criminals. It's family money. You'll be fine. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet, just one page from the binder. I laid it on the table. $1,200 at GameHub Electronics. 2 weeks before Christmas. Caleb, you posted your new console on Instagram that same night. His face flushed, ears red. You went through my stuff. It's my money, I said flatly. Mom reached for the paper, her hands shaking. Don't use words like theft, Jessica. That's ugly. Ugly is draining your daughter's savings and calling it love, I shot back. Dad's voice dropped to the warning tone I knew since childhood. Enough. You're blowing this out of proportion. We'll pay you back. When I asked. My voice didn't waver. The silence that followed was louder than any slam of a door. Mom finally whispered soon. But soon had been their word for years, a placeholder for never. I folded the page and slid it back into my bag. You don't have a plan. You never did. Caleb stood grabbing his jacket, trying to reclaim control. You're not calling the cops. Don't be stupid. I met his glare lips curving in something close to a smile. We'll see. I walked out the door, closing softly behind me. No dramatic slam, no shouting match. Just quiet. And I knew that quiet unnerved them more than anything. Over the next week, their tactics shifted. Mom left voicemails dripping with guilt. I can't sleep, sweetheart. My heart can't take this stress. Please think of your mother. Dad sent a text. You're tearing us apart. Is that what you want, to destroy your own bloodline? Caleb blasted me with insults at 2 a.m. You're dead to me. Don't ever call me family again. But beneath the rage, I sensed their fear. They were losing their grip, their free lifeline, and they didn't know how to survive without me. And that was the shift I clung to. For years, I had been the one afraid of their disappointment, their silence, their anger. Now, they were afraid of me, or rather of what I carried, the truth. One night, I sat on my balcony, the Montana air, crisp, the stars sharp against the sky. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, screen lighting with their names. I let it buzz. The silence afterward was sweet, almost holy. In that silence, I realized something. They weren't fighting for me. They were fighting for what I gave them. The money, the sacrifices, the endless yeses. Without those, I wasn't useful. Without those, I wasn't theirs. And for the first time, I was okay with that. Because the power struggle wasn't about money anymore. It was about who I was willing to be. And I had already decided I wasn't their bank, their crutch, their scapegoat. I was done. By the time the sun slid behind the pines, the sky over town had gone the color of old bruise. I parked at the curb outside my parents' house and sat for a breath with the engine off, hands folded over the binder in my lap. For years, I'd arrived here carrying groceries, birthday gifts, cash we'd all pretend was borrowing. Tonight, I brought only paper and a spine that finally felt like it belonged to me. Inside the living room looked staged Dad at the head of the table in his flannel, Caleb slouched in the corner, Mom fussing with napkins that didn't match the dishes. No food, no coffee. Just a performance waiting for its audience. Well, Caleb drawled, phone in hand like a weapon. Look who decided not to ghost us. I set my bag down with care, the zippers hum louder than anyone's breathing. Let's talk numbers. Dad snorted. You're not doing this. But I already was. I slid 3 stapled spreadsheets onto the table, each page a map of where I'd disappeared. $1, $200 at GameHub Electronics, $614 at Bell Lux Salon, 4 cash withdrawals of $300 in a week, a $200 steakhouse dinner you called Business and Dad. I tapped the dates, all without my permission. Mom's fingers hovered over the columns like she could smooth them into something gentler. Jessica, we told you there were bills, things we needed. Needed, I repeated softly the word, a stone. You needed my silence. Dad leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. You think some papers make this criminal. We're family. I met his eyes and for the first time in my life didn't flinch. Detective Reed has copies. There's an open case. Caleb laughed too loud. You're bluffing. 3 hard knocks bit into the door frame. The sound ran through the house like a fault line. Mom jumped. Dad's jaw locked. Caleb's laugh died in his throat. Financial Crimes Unit, a woman's voice called. Open up! I stepped aside as Dad hesitated, then yanked the door open. Detective Allison Reed entered with 2 officers, badge clipped to her jacket hair, pulled back no extra expression. She looked at me then at the table. Jessica, that's me. Thank you for your cooperation, she said and turned to my parents. We're here to ask questions regarding reported unauthorized withdrawals in excess of $15,000. Mom pressed a hand to her chest. You can't be serious. She's our daughter. Family doesn't make theft legal, Detective Reed said evenly. The room shrank to the beat of my own pulse. Papers rustled. The officers fanned through the stack, asked calm questions, marked lines with sticky flags. Dad's red crept up his neck as if anger could tint the truth another color. Caleb paced, muttering, then stopped when the taller officer asked for his phone. Voluntary for now, the officer said, but we'll subpoena records if necessary. You can't, Caleb started, then swallowed whatever came next. Mom focused on me, eyes bright, voice trembling in that controlled way I knew too well. Sweetheart, if we lose the house, if your father... You were comfortable, I said quietly. Not desperate. You were comfortable with me paying for your comfort. Dad slammed his palm on the table, the old intimidation tactic cracking the quiet like a firecracker. Enough. You are humiliating us. I'm refusing to pretend I answered. That's different. Detective Reed didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She explained what excessive unauthorized withdrawals meant in this county, what constitutes consent, how patterns matter in a DA's eyes. She asked Mom to read a text on page 19, where she promised to put it back on Friday. She asked Dad to explain why his business dinner posted the same night he called me for bridge money. She asked Caleb to square his new console with we were buying groceries. No one looked at me when they answered. That felt like its own small justice. When the taller officer began reading rights, the room turned hollow. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked like a hammer striking glass. Mom sagged into a chair. Dad stared at the tablecloth as if a different pattern might arrive if he glared hard enough. Caleb pressed his lips into a thin line, eyes bouncing between the door and his shoes. Detective Reed gathered copies and slid them into a manila envelope. We're not making arrests tonight, she said. This is an evidence collection and formal interview notice. Counsel up. We'll be in touch. Relief and disappointment tangled in my chest in a knot I didn't expect. I hadn't come for handcuffs. I'd come for a line in the sand that everyone could finally see. As they wrapped up, Mom reached across the table for my hand. Her fingers trembled. We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought you could handle it. You're the strong one. For a heartbeat, I saw every Thanksgiving, every whispered just this once, every time I smiled with a rent notice in my bag. I pulled my hand back like from a hot stove. Strength isn't letting you bleed me dry. It's stopping the cut. Detective Reed nodded once at me on her way out. We'll update you, she said. Not a promise, but a path. After the door shut and their footsteps faded down the porch, the house felt smaller, stripped of its illusions. The cracked photo frame on their hallway shelf caught a sliver of light. That jagged line across my face used to make me sad. Tonight, it looked like a seam where something breaks and something else begins. Dad spoke without looking up. You'll regret this. The words landed dull, like nails tossed in a drawer. I already regret the years I didn't do it, I said, and picked up my bag. On the porch, the night air knifed clean into my lungs. Across the street, someone's wind chimes clinked out a thin, uncertain melody. I stood there long enough for my eyes to adjust, for the outline of the pines to firm against the sky. Inside, muffled voices rose and fell, but they no longer reached me. When my phone buzzed in the car, voicemails piling like snowdrifts, I let it hum. The screen lit my hands, Dad's name, then Mom's, then Caleb's. I watched them pass without tapping play. The quiet that followed felt like a door softly finally closing. Driving away, I passed Rosie's diner. The neon flickered in its usual blue-pink stutter. I pulled into the lot and sat in Uncle Tom's old space engine, ticking palms flat on the wheel. I could almost hear him stir his coffee, that rasping voice. "Set lines, kid," I whispered into the steering column. "They're set." The words echoed back in the small cabin of my car, not as victory, but as fact. When I got home, I took the cracked family photo from my closet and set it on my kitchen counter. The split ran like lightning across 17-year-old me. I traced it with a fingertip, then slid the picture out and placed it in a new frame I'd bought last spring and never used. The glass lay smooth over my face. The seam didn't vanish, it just stopped being the only thing I could see. On a scrap of paper, I wrote a letter I wouldn't send. "I'm not your bank, your fallback, your resource. I'm not your proof that you're good parents because you raised a responsible daughter. I'm a person, and I belong to myself." I folded it once and tucked it behind the photo, a small private covenant. In the stillness of my apartment, the echo I'd feared, the one that used to pull me back to their door, finally changed shape. It wasn't their hunger calling my name. It was my own voice, steady and ordinary, asking simple questions. "Do you want coffee? A walk tomorrow? A new pair of shoes that won't leak in the snow?" I answered yes. No fireworks, no confetti. Just the relentless quiet of a life that no longer owed anyone its oxygen. And that at last sounded like peace. The days after the confrontation blurred into a strange rhythm. My phone never stopped buzzing, missed calls, voicemails, long texts that swung between guilt and rage. I let them pile up like snow on a road I no longer traveled. At first, the silence was unsettling. For years, my body had been trained to anticipate the next crisis, the next request, the next just this once. Without that constant pull, I found myself listening for storms that never came. I'd catch myself staring at the screen, waiting for an explosion that had already happened. But slowly, my nervous system caught up with the truth. I was free. The first voicemail I listened to was Mom's, her voice cracked with performance. "Jessica, you didn't have to do this. We could have handled it as a family. The charges are serious. They're saying we might lose the house. Think about your mother." Delete. Then Dad's. "You've gone too far. Loyalty means standing with your blood. You're humiliating us. What will the neighbors say?" Delete. Then Caleb's. Bitter, resentful. "Hope you're happy. My accounts are frozen. Work is breathing down my neck. Mom can't stop crying over a few payments." A few payments. $15,000. Delete. But not all messages came from them. 3 days later, my cousin Natalie texted someone I hadn't spoken to in years since she'd distanced herself from the chaos. "I know we haven't talked, but you were right about them. I used to think you were cold. Now I think you're brave. I couldn't have done it. Brave." No one in my family had ever used that word for me. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like someone who had drawn a line and someone else had seen it clearly. Weeks passed. Detective Reed updated me periodically, evidence-logged interviews, scheduled accounts reviewed. Nothing moved quickly, but progress whispered in slow increments. Caleb lost his job under internal investigation. Mom sold jewelry and furniture to cover legal fees. Dad ranted to anyone who would listen, but fewer and fewer listened. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't want revenge. What I felt was air in my lungs I hadn't realized was missing. I started cooking real meals, music playing in my kitchen without calculating their bills. I bought myself a coat that didn't leak in the snow. I went for walks without checking my phone every block. The ordinary became extraordinary in its quietness. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a check for $1,000 and a handwritten note in slanted blue ink. "Jessica, I left them. You were right. Watching you stand up gave me courage. This is for the rent, groceries, school fees you covered when no one else would. It's not enough, but it's something. Thank you." Natalie, I read it twice, not because of the money, but because for once someone saw me not as a bank, but as a person. I tucked the note into the back of the frame that now held the family photo, not as a reminder of pain, but of a seed proof that even in fractured families, truth could ripple outward. 3 months later, Detective Reed called with the final update. The case had moved forward. Court dates loomed. My father scrambled for a lawyer who would work cheap. My mother cried in every interview. Caleb blamed everyone but himself. "Are you okay?" Detective Reed asked at the end of the call, her voice steady but kind. I looked out at the Montana sky, wide and endless sunlight catching on pine needles like fireflies. "Yeah," I said. "I am." That night, I sat with a pen and a notebook. I wrote a letter I'd never send. "I'm not your ATM. I'm not your scapegoat. I'm not the proof you hold up to excuse your own failures. I am not your safety net. I'm done. I'm whole without you." I folded the letter, tucked it next to Natalie's note, and closed the notebook. The weight of it felt like closure, not the loud kind, but the kind you carry quietly in your chest. Peace wasn't fireworks. It wasn't them begging at my door or me slamming it shut. Peace was sipping coffee on a balcony and realizing 24 hours had passed without anyone asking me for anything. It was knowing my strength wasn't measured by how much I could give, but by when I chose to stop. For the first time in my life, my name felt like mine. Jessica Harper. Not the responsible one. Not the bank. Just Jessica. And if you've ever stood in that role, if you've ever been the one holding everyone else together while no one held you, then you know how heavy it is. And maybe you know how freeing it can be to finally set it down. If this story hit you deep, don't carry it alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and your story matters. Hit that like button if you've ever felt the weight of family betrayal, and subscribe, because the next story will make you feel seen in ways you never expected. Sometimes the quietest victories are the ones that change everything.